Good evening and welcome to KMVT's 2012 City Council Candidates Debates. My name is Seth Shostak. The debates are brought to you as a co-sponsorship activity of KMVT and also the League of Women Voters. Now we have 6 candidates here this evening. There are 4 slots in the City Council. I think you know that they're staggered in terms of the elections for 2-year terms. And so 4 of these 6 people will be elected, 2 will not. We're going to hear from them. We're going to hear from them on a variety of issues. We have people here who are going to, in fact, be grilling them like shrimp on the Barbie. So that will be quite an exciting thing. Let me just say a few things here, housekeeping things, but important. The producer of tonight's show is Shelley Wolf, and the director is Bobby Chastain. The graphics are due to Mark Taylor. To my left, to your right, is Claudia Cruz. She's with the Mountain View Patch. She's here to interrogate the candidates, and to my right is Dan DeBolt from the Mountain View Voice. Okay, well, we're going to get our candidates warmed up by having them talk about themselves. And they're going to introduce themselves for 1 minute each, tell us a little bit about who they are and what they stand for. So we'll do that, beginning with you, Chris Clark. Tell us something.
Good evening. I'm Chris Clark. I've served on a couple of Mountain View commissions, originally the Human Relations Commission for a couple of years, which deals a lot with diversity and outreach within the community, and now the Environmental Planning Commission, which deals with a lot of the city's land use issues. Most recently, we just wrapped up the general plan process. I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, moved out here a little over a decade ago to attend Stanford, and built a career in technology. I currently work at a small technology company here in Mountain View, and as I've just mentioned, served on a couple of commissions over the last few years, and I'm looking forward to running for City Council, hopefully taking one of the 4 open seats. We have 4 open seats, 2 are completely open, and I hope to bring kind of a new perspective to City Council, but also the experience that I've gained over the years, and continue crafting more comprehensive solutions to the city's problems.
Chris Clark, thank you very much. Next up, Margaret Capriles.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Capriles, and I am a 40-year plus resident and have raised my family here. And I am also a professional of Hewlett-Packard for over 27 years, and I'm a business consultant right now. And I am looking forward to using my community involvement and as well as my professional experience to bring a really good balanced perspective to the council. And I think that my skills in data processing, solving will help us to come to some good solutions for the city, and making sure that we have all the citizens that are interested in those issues are involved in helping us solving those problems. I look forward to serving on the City Council and working with these great people that we have today.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Next up, Jim Neal.
Hi, my name is Jim Neal, and I'm running for the City Council because I believe that the election this year is all about choices. The choices that you make this year for City Council will determine what effect the council's decision has on your life for the next 4 years. And I believe that I bring a unique perspective, or I would bring a unique perspective to the council, because I have the same perspective that you have. I go out and I work every day. I go out and I talk to my friends about things that are going on in the city, and I'm going to school, and I have a bachelor's degree in business administration. So I believe that that particular item would be very useful on the council. I also think that you need someone on the council that's going to represent your point of view and that is really going to understand what you go through every day. So I hope that you will use one of your votes for me on November the 6th and put someone on the council that really understands what you go through every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We'll move over to the other table, beginning with Mike Kasperzak.
Thank you, Seth, and welcome to our community television. Thanks for tuning in this evening. I've lived in Mountain View for over 35 years now, and have served in a number of different occupations over the course of that time. I've been a trial lawyer. I've been a commercial mediator for over 20 years. I've started working with a small startup company up in San Francisco that does neighborhood-based social networking. And with respect to the city, I've served on the Parks Commission, the Planning Commission, the City Council, and I've had the honor of serving as the Mayor of Mountain View this year. My priorities, my top 3 priorities for the year, are continuing to work on affordable housing, work at dealing with the transportation and transit issues that we have in town, and ensuring that Mountain View is fiscally sustainable. This year we just kept our AAA bond rating, and that's really important, and I'll be working to make sure that we keep that in the future.
Thank you, Mike. John McAllister?
Yeah, thank you. I have a campaign slogan that says "Residents First." I developed that the slogan because of my 5 years on the Planning Commission. I noticed a lot of projects would come to us, and the public and the residents were involved midway through the process. So during the term I was the chair, I helped initiate a program where we review the role of the Environmental Planning Commission, and we came through that, and we were able to expand the role of the Environmental Planning Commission such that when a development comes to the citizens of Mountain View, it's heard earlier on in the process. And I've always believed that the residents need to be heard first. And hopefully with that production, we can develop a collaboration. And when the project comes to fruition, it's going to be better for all of us. A little background on myself. I'm a resident for 55 years. I'm a certified public accountant and business owner, which I believe will help when we do the financial reports on the city and we do our budgeting. It will help give that background perspective of someone who does budgets all the time. I've been on the Environmental Planning Commission for 5 years as chair and vice chair. I've been involved with the community through youth sports, Rotarian, and I've been involved so that I give a perspective that helps encompass the whole community.
Thank you very much, John.
Oh, thank you.
And finally, John Inks.
Yes, hello everyone out there in TV land. I'm John Inks, the Vice Mayor elected in 2008. I got my start in the city actually 13 years ago, pouring cider at a Christmas tree lighting, and have been active with the city for the last 13 years as a volunteer, a mediator, a commissioner, and as a city council member. The last 4 years have been very rewarding and satisfying to me. I've served with the same council members for 4 years at balanced budgets, and we replaced all three council appointees, and basically have kept the city running with management changes that have been transparent to the voters. In the discussion tonight, I'll be talking about some challenges that we have in the future with regard to budget and general plan implementation, and I look forward to working with the new council members so that we keep the city going, and with the different chemistry that will be on the council, we keep the city stable.
Okay, John Inks, thank you. And so we've heard from all 6 of you. I think the viewers now see who you are. Now they're going to hear a little bit more about what you are, what you would do for them, what you would do for this city. And I'm going to start off with a question just about affordable housing. You might think affordable housing, why do you even need that in the Silicon Valley? We're blessed with a lot of high-tech industry. We're, relative to the rest of the country, fairly well off, very well off, I would say. So why do we need affordable housing? Presumably because we want some diversity here. We don't want to price everybody out of this city that works in this city. It's the usual example is, do you want your barista giving you the coffee in the morning to have to drive 50 miles just to get to work? That doesn't seem right. It also doesn't seem good for this city. So who pays for affordable housing? Is it going to be the developers? Are we going to spread it out amongst the entire populace, single lot homeowners? How do we do it? Where do we come up with the money to pay for affordable housing, or should we? John?
Well, Seth, I think when you talk about affordable housing, you're probably talking about our subsidized housing program or the BMR program. It has 2 major problems with it. Number one, it is unfair, I believe, as you described, that it is the burden for affordable housing is individual owners of development property and the builders of that property. We did a survey this year that looked at a parcel tax, and it wasn't as popular as it needed to be to pass it. So I think it's unfair burden on certain individuals. And second, it's not very effective. The affordable housing funds that we collect, we stockpile millions of dollars that aren't actually spent on that much affordable housing. The affordable housing program that we have in Mountain View, unfortunately, it actually serves a tiny, tiny fraction of the low-income population that needs the housing. I think that in order to have a program that actually houses people, low income people, you have to look at product type. You have to look at the inclusionary aspect of affordable housing. And until we look at the whole program and recognize the limitations of the one that we have now, I think we're going to just continue to stockpile money and not really help low-income people.
So what action would you take, though? If you were on the city council, what would you promote?
Well, first of all, what I just said, in other words, to recognize that, because what we do is we continue to do the same thing, and in fact, in a couple of weeks, we're going to get an ordinance, I believe, that is actually going to perhaps maybe increase the percentage fee, thinking that that is going to motivate property owners and developers to build more low-income housing. It's not. It's actually going to discourage housing. It's going to raise the cost of market rate housing.
Okay, heard from John. Does somebody else want to weigh in on this? Yes,
betcha.
Mike.
You betcha. Affordable housing has been one of my key positions for many years. I've supported the below market rate housing program, the inclusionary or the impact fee on commercial development, and I support the impact fee on rental housing that's being built. Right now, because of a court decision, rental housing developers do not have to provide any sort of rental of below market rate housing. And it is important, as you said, Seth, so that this community isn't a community made up of only people that can afford to live in $1 million homes. The median income of the average in Mountain View is about $105,000. That's the median income for a family of 4. And very low income is under $50,000. That seems like a lot of money still in this day and age, but that's low income in Mountain View. We need to have housing options for the broad spectrum of people in Mountain View. I've supported these programs because, as the Vice Mayor mentioned, we did do a survey on a parcel tax to support affordable housing programs. 55% of the people in Mountain View said they were in favor of that. Now, that's not enough to get to a 2/3 vote, but more than a majority of Mountain View supports affordable housing in Mountain View. And I think that was a really telling statistic. And people want a diversity of housing stocks in Mountain View so that we have a diversity in our citizenship and the people that live here, and that we don't have the baristas, the reporters, having to drive from all over Kingdom Come, polluting the air, adding to greenhouse gases. So it really is important. And we do have something coming up in a couple of weeks to include the rental housing developers in this process. And let's be clear, people are still building homes in Mountain View, even though we have these fees, because they're still making enough money as developers that they can still contribute to the affordable housing.
So the fees aren't really the blockhead. But how far did you drive in as a reporter here, Dan?
I live downtown, so
It's not that.
You bike, right?
Okay. Well, I'll
jump on.
I'm waiting for an action plan here, John.
Well, okay, I'm not sure about I do have an action plan, but I don't have the barista, but I do have an ice cream scooper that works for me, my shift leader. I'm an owner of a small business in Mountain View, the Baskin Robbins, and we have a great crew, and unfortunately they have to travel from San Jose or East Palo Alto to live in Mountain View, and they would be the people that would be taking the advantages of subsidized housing. My idea, and I agree somewhat with John Inks, is that it's a community issue. It's not a developer issue. It's not a housing issue. It's a community issue. And if the residents of Mountain View feel it's important that we have this diversity, and they keep telling us, yes, we like the diversity, we should go and maybe reevaluate the parcel tax or maybe a small sales tax. So it's spread out. It's a very small increment to everybody. But it is something that we do need to keep, again, to the affordable, to keep the traffic down. People could live in town. It's definitely something that can be achieved.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a small sales tax. There's a measure on the ballot this November to raise the sales tax. I guess it becomes the 3rd highest in the country or something like that. You would add this on top of that? How about this table over here? have something to say.
Thank
Yes,
you, Seth.
Margaret.
Yes, I think that when we look at affordable housing, it certainly has much more to do with not only our lower income people, which we definitely want to continue to subsidize, but we absolutely need to think about our public service employees. They are also providing a service to our community, our teachers and our police and our fire. Often they come from many, many miles to serve our city. And in case of an emergency, if we really needed them and they were driving here from Brentwood or other locations outside the city, I think we would be hard pressed to get through an emergency. So I think we need to look at what is the plan now? What is the action are we taking now? Where can we fine tune that and make sure that we are incorporating the full range of socioeconomic income earners in our city? That's the way we're going to maintain the diversity. And I think that we must look at precisely how are we going to make that happen? Who is going to contribute? Is it only the developers? Is it the employees that are employing workers that want to work in the city? How can we all come together as a community to make sure that we maintain that diversity?
Okay, thank you, Margaret. You guys want to weigh in?
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
don't have to answer every question. I've made this clear. But
This is a biggie.
This
Seth.
is a biggie.
This is a biggie.
I want to hear from you.
I think it's important. I think we all agree that continuing to ensure that Mountain View is a diverse community is important. I'm not sure we're ready at this point for a sales tax measure or a parcel tax measure. I think what we should be looking at is what we will be looking at in a few weeks, and that is crafting an impact fee that is spread fairly across not just those that are building housing, but also those who are generating the demand for housing. And I think if you spread that, if you broaden the base there, and if you keep the fee competitive, I don't think we'll tramp down the supply that is in the pipeline. And I think so. The way that you address housing costs, number one, is supply. You ensure that Mountain View is building enough housing to meet demand. And granted, we want to make sure that housing fits with the community, but I think it's important that we not just stop building housing, because what that will do is just aggravate the price problem even more. Number two, we look at the impact fees that I think will be coming before council in a couple of weeks. And I think that we ensure that we're doing something that's fair and across the board and will generate the funds that we need to implement the programs that we want to implement. And I actually, a year or so ago, served on a NOFA committee, which was charged with, we had built up at $10 or $12 million in affordable housing funds, and we were charged with deciding how best to disseminate those funds. And you'll see projects over the next few years that are actually quite nice. And remember that affordable in Mountain View isn't necessarily what you would think of in other communities. It's the single teacher who's just starting out. It's someone who normally would have to find one or two roommates to be able to afford a market rate place in Mountain View. So I think it's important that we build those developments. You'll see one right now behind Tide House is being built. It's quite nice. It's not what you would think of in the traditional sense of projects. But I don't think we're at the point yet of needing a parcel or a sales tax. I think the impact fee will carry us for quite a while we figure out a longer term strategy.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, I don't think sales tax will work either. I just don't think that the votes will be there. And I do think that Chris touched on the issue a little bit, in that it is an issue of supply and demand. Basically, you have a couple of companies here like Google and Intuit that are just drawing thousands and thousands of people to this area every year, and there's just no place to put them. And to be honest, I think the city kind of shot itself in the foot in the general plan when it decided not to put any housing in the North Bayshore area, because that's where all the demand is. And yet you're saying we've got a shortage of housing, but you can't build here in this area that has an awful lot of space for housing to be built. Now, I know that it's kind of controversial because that area does house a lot of wildlife. There are levees there that have to be considered and things of that nature. But I think you've got a lot of very smart people here that can figure out how to put housing in that area in a smart way that it doesn't impact the natural resources that we have in that area, that you still have a lot of space and that you still have open areas, and yet also you can start to reduce that demand. And I think that's the only way that you can get housing down to an affordable level, is to actually find a way to start reducing the demand in the area.
All right, well, we've all had a chance to hear the candidates weigh in on affordable housing. Get the impression that affordable housing is something that we want. What's less clear is exactly how to get it. But I'm going to turn the questioning over to the journalists here now. I'll begin with you, Claudia. Why don't you pose a question to the candidates here?
Well, thank you all for being here. I'm actually going to stay on the issue of housing, because affordable housing still looks to the future, and homes that could be built in Mountain View. But there are people that could be displaced right now who are renters. There's the issue of possible rent control. If you were a city council member, would you consider some sort of rent stabilization or control for residents who've been here a certain number of years, residents who work in the city, certain residents who participate in certain activities that benefit the community? There's people whose rents could rise 30%, 50% because of the lack of affordable housing that is yet to be built, or the NOFA funds that are yet to be dispersed. So I'm curious. I guess we started on this side. We can start on this.
Yeah, just give me a signal if you want to.
I'm curious about rent control. What do you guys think about stabilizing the rents and keeping the diversity that is here?
Yes,
Jim?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider rent control. That's been done in San Francisco, and San Francisco is just about the most expensive place on the planet to live. Anytime the government tries to put in any kind of controls or tries to do things to manipulate the economy in an area, it works for a little while, but then eventually it backfires, and you wind up with a lot of unanticipated consequences that you didn't look for previously. So in the beginning, you might have rents go down and be under control, but after a few years, you'd see that the rents would actually skyrocket, because as each place comes available, that owner then needs to make up the money that they were losing over the years that the person was within that particular apartment or condo or whatever it is, and then you've got the same thing all over again, but it's magnified. So I think that's a bad idea.
Would you also include in that the possibility that the units might not be very well maintained? This was a problem in New York City. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that actually that could be another issue, because if the owner isn't getting the market value for the property and they're paying increasing property taxes on it every year, then things like that probably are going to slip. Things like maintenance and safety and things of that nature. So yes, I think it would create a lot of problems.
Mike?
Yeah, I think, and Jim points out, and I think it's true, is that rent control acts is the worst disincentive for the investment in rental development. 4 years ago, I was campaigning that we needed actual apartments being built in Mountain View because we hadn't had any built in over 10 years. Right now, we've got about 250 about to come online on Evelyn. There's about 300 at the San Antonio Shopping Center. The council's approved another 150 or so on El Camino, and there's others out there. Those people are developing, even though we've been talking about the impact fee. But if we were to have rent control, statistics across the country show that people don't really invest in that. There's also been a lot of state laws that now really regulate whether you can have rent control or not. But it really is a disincentive to development. And what we really do need is supply. We need people building more ownership housing and more rental housing. And even market rate rental at $2,000 to $3,500 a unit, depending on the size, is more affordable than buying a home, because you don't have to put down $250,000 as a down payment. Just got to put down 1 month's rent. So while it's expensive, it's more affordable than owning a home, and it does serve the clientele of the Googles, the engineers, the Intuit engineers coming in, which then also frees up people that want to move into newer places and frees up some of the older, less expensive housing.
So people who currently live here, who are being asked to pay 30% and 50% more in rent right now, you're okay with them leaving the city? Chris?
You have to recognize, so the question was about rent control. So here's, rent control is a short-term solution with terrible negative long-term consequences. And we've seen this in many different cities which are trying to, today, large cities that are undoing their rent control ordinances, because what happens is you get a short-term, it's a short-term solution that makes a lot of people happy, and then in the long run actually causes harm. And as a leader, what you have to look at are what is the right thing to do for Mountain View in the long term, even if it's not exactly what you want in the short term. And we've seen time and again, I'm an economics minor, that rent control actually harms the very people that it's meant to help in the long term. So what you need to do to avoid spikes like we've seen, the reason that we've had the spikes, and as someone who rented in various neighborhoods of the city for many years, I can tell you how much it's gone up in the last few years. The problem was supply. As the mayor pointed out, we didn't build a single new apartment complex for over a decade, and then all of a sudden the economy picked up and there was a housing crunch, and of course immediately that raises the prices across the board, and it's a shock to the system. So what we should have been doing was, it's not just our fault, it's that the economy didn't support building housing over time. But now we're finally going to have units coming in the pipeline that are at the higher end, but it will also free up units and get us back to a more stable picture where we were a few years ago. And yes, there's going to be some short-term pain. There's no way around that. And the politically easy thing to say is, of course, we should do rent control and help those folks in the short term. But you really have to look at this from a long-term perspective, and what is the best policy decision for the city in the long term, and not just have a knee-jerk reaction and cause more harm than good, I think, in the long run. Rent control isn't the answer. Supply is the answer, and beefing up our affordable housing program is another answer to that, in order to stabilize things in the long run.
Okay. Is this under control, Claudia?
Yes, I just wanted to know.
I think it's under control.
Not the
I'm going
rent.
to turn to
discussion.
Dan DeBolt now and give him a chance to.
Oh, okay.
to go. We only have 2 hours, so I thought we ought to get through a couple of more issues.
Sure. Well, I could follow up on the housing thing.
You could do that. Yeah.
Big deal in Mountain View.
I'm curious to know if you guys think that the city's zoning and the way that housing development has been done recently and is adequate to meet the housing demand, and if it's adequate to make housing affordable for people in a market, purely market sense, without BMR program, and what can be done to make it better, and is the new general plan adequate in meeting housing demand?
Is the general plan adequate? Are you addressing the need? Yeah, John Inks.
Well, it touches back on the same question that was just asked, because Claudia is asking, what do you do for the low-income people? One thing that we can do is to be aware of the market. You need to have council members that understand that we don't dictate rental housing or ownership housing. It's a supply and demand thing. And so, for instance, we have an application, not an application, but it's something called a gatekeeper request coming to us this week that is actually changing what was proposed as mixed-use ownership housing to rental housing. So that's a way of getting at what Chris said was increasing the supply. I think one other thing, when you talk about the very low income people too, it's presented to us as if that's some kind of a structural problem. In other words, you have to deal with such a percent AMI. And we ought to be looking at the total problem, which is the person too, and that is, what about ability to pay? Because the honest truth is, the baristas, they are in competition with the other professionals that can pay, $2,500 or $3,000 a month. And so, there's some things like job experience, there's things like education, English language proficiency, those things I think that we have to look at as well. But the city, I think, by not dictating, we cannot dictate how housing is developed. That the market covers that.
Yeah. Did he address your question there?
Yeah.
Okay, and John McAllister, you also wanted to weigh in.
That we just finished the general plan, and when you were saying, does the general plan address it? I mean, we've identified a large part of Mountain View to be higher density, especially along public transit. So I know that they were talking about just around the San Antonio El Camino, we're looking at about 1,500 new units that are coming on board. Another issue that you were talking about is rent control could be that we haven't looked at the efficiencies. I know the city has a cap on the efficiencies, like the ones that are over on San Antonio. We should remove that cap, because when we're talking about overall diversity of the city, we also have to look at the diversity of the product. And that's one area where you can take the small single studio and put the individual in there. But we have a cap on it. So why are we doing that? So that will help open up another product of housing, and along with the rest of the city being developed, we will address the shortage supply and get more housing in.
Right. There's still some concern that there's a job housing imbalance, and that there's going to, in the general plan, that there's so many jobs allowed that it widens the gap even worse than it already is.
But you need to look at the housing and jobs as I see it as a regional problem. I mean, you look at Los Altos, they have housing, but they don't have many jobs. We're a small city. You can put person in 300 square feet of when they consider building an office. But we can't do that with housing. So we have to look at it as a regional problem and incorporate all the cities in the county to help solve that problem. If we need to increase our transportation and move people around, it's one piece of the puzzle. It's not all of it. We can't solve all the problems, but we have to bring it on as a regional problem and address it.
I'll just be brief. I think what you'll see, the general plan that we just passed, I think goes a long way in getting us in the right direction. And you mentioned how we've been planning and developing over the last few years. One of the problems that we've had over the last 4 years is that we had a general plan that's really, really old, and we were working on a new one, and we had all these proposals coming forward that didn't quite know exactly where to go. And so now that we have the general plan in place and we'll be doing the precise plans, I think we'll have a much better direction of where to go. And I think what you'll see is we'll be much better able to meet housing demands, address that jobs housing imbalance going forward, coupled with the housing element that was just approved. So I think with those two things approved, and then us looking at the precise plans and making sure that where we do grow, we're integrating it well with the existing neighborhoods, and then we're not kind of shooting ourselves in the foot and going to regret it in 10, 20 years. I think the general plan and the housing element are a step in the right direction, and I think you'll see we'll be much better equipped to deal with the jobs housing imbalance in the next decade or so.
And
Yes,
I
Margaret.
just want to add one quick thing and say, as much as we would love all the workers who work here to live in Mountain View, that's not possible in 12 square miles. And I think to, agree with my colleagues here that I think we've got a great direction in the general plan, and we'll be able to address what we can and how we can, but we really need to have that looked at from a regional perspective. Thanks.
That actually, Margaret, that brings up something that's been discussed in earlier candidate debates going back a number of years, and that is, how big do we want this city to be in terms of the population? You've already told us how big it is in terms of the acreage. But, there was a discussion in the past of sort of capping Mountain View at around 75,000 people. And I think that that hasn't happened, and that isn't likely to happen. Does anybody still care how big the population gets? Is that something? Yes, Jim?
Well, I don't really care how big the population gets. I don't think that's something that the city can dictate anyway. Basically, again, it's an issue of supply and demand. I mean, a lot of these issues hit on the very same thing. People want to come here because the jobs are here. In an economy like the economy that we've got right now in the U.S., and you've got companies like Google and Intuit and all these other companies that are startups that are coming here to Mountain View because they can exist on the synergy of these other large corporations, that's going to naturally attract people here. So, we can't put up a Berlin Wall, even though we've got a couple of sections that were just donated. We can't put up a Berlin Wall to keep people out and say you can't come here to have what we have. So all we can do is invite people to come here and try to accommodate the situation as best we can. We have to work in partnership with the companies. We have to work in partnership with the developers, and we have to work in partnership with the citizens that are here and try to pull the best ideas together to figure out, okay, we've got all these people coming. Now, how do we make sure that we can integrate all these companies and all these people into the city in an effective manner? And I think that's the best that we can do.
Yes, Mike.
One of the things about growth, and you can't really limit the growth. I don't think that's appropriate. It's a little bit like rent control. It just stagnates the community. But I think what's really important for the city is to manage the growth so that every incremental or the increase in growth incrementally improves the quality of life for everybody else in Mountain View. You know, as the companies, and I actually do think we should have had a housing section in the North Bay Shore, because that would have been about 1,000 units. And we have a lot more commercial development or office development potential than we do have housing under the new general plan. So I think what we need to do is ensure that as we get more commercial development, that provides benefits to the community, that it addresses the transportation problems, not just bigger garages to hold more cars, but really invests in quality of life in terms of transportation and traffic. I had to go down to Microsoft today at 9:30. It took me 5 changes of a light to get over Highway 101 because of the traffic getting into the North Bay Shore area. We need to find other solutions, and it's not just more vehicles operating more efficiently. But as the companies want to grow, they can help invest in that. So it's better for their employees, it's better for their community, and it inspires people to want to work and live here in town. And I think that's really sort of finding the sweet spot in how we manage our growth.
I think that's a good segue to an issue which I think you all have fairly strong feelings about, and that is transportation. We have the local transportation, we have the North Bay Shore problem, we've got all these companies on the other side of 101, and as you mentioned, Mike, the traffic there in the mornings and the evenings is a wonder to behold. There's a lot of sheet metal not moving very quickly. Google is holding meetings about what can we do about that. There's high-speed rail. I know some of you want to weigh in on high-speed rail. There are the plans, and they seem to be being modified as we speak, but plans by the Valley Transportation Authority to narrow El Camino Real, or if not narrow it, at least give some of the lanes to dedicated bus lanes and so forth. So let's take some of these things. Let's take the North Bay Shore problem, because you brought it up, Mike.
Okay.
What are you advocating? Because you have a fairly radical point of view on this.
I like to think of it as visionary, Seth. But no,
Maybe they're not.
There are some technologies being developed and in existence now. One of them is personal rapid transit. I'm kind of smitten with the idea. There's a company over at NASA on the Mountain View side of NASA that is trying to develop a new transportation system. It's not on the road. It's a kind of a George Jetson-y sort of thing. I don't know if it is the future, but I think it could be equivalent to the Transcontinental Railroad in terms of transportation. It's fast, it's efficient, it moves a lot of people, it gets people off the road, it's electrically operated.
Can you tell us what it is?
The name of the company is Skytran.
Okay.
Skytran.us is their website. But I mean, that would be an innovative transportation solution. I mean, San Jose is looking at PRT systems to connect the airport with BART and Caltrain. We need to do different things. I mean, you mentioned El Camino and bus rapid transit. I mean, you could have a system like this going down El Camino. Just as an update, they've decided they're going to do mixed flow with the bus rapid transit on El Camino from Sunnyvale through Palo Alto.
Almost sounds like an oxymoron,
Yeah,
doesn't
well,
it? I mean, mixed flow means that the buses don't move either. It's me, but just me. Jim, you want to say something about high-speed rail? You don't want it to go through Mountain View.
Absolutely not. The reason is that in the 90s, high-speed rail would have been a brilliant idea. California was flush with money. Everybody had all kinds of cash. The state of California is, for all intents and purposes, broke. The budget of the state of California is $100 billion. What high-speed rail costs is $100 billion. Guess what? If you pay for high-speed rail, you've got nothing left over for anything else. You've got nothing left for to pay firefighters and teachers and pay for schools or anything else that you want. And also, they're talking about funding the high-speed rail, getting the other 80%. They've got it 20% funded. They need another 80%. So where are they going to get this money? The only place they can get it is from us. They're talking about the possibility of using some cap and trade scheme, which probably isn't even legal. If you look at the legislative analyst report that was published back in April of this year, even the state legislative analyst says that this is a horrible idea and that it's completely unworkable from a financial standpoint. Not to mention that they're going to have to use eminent domain all the way from San Francisco down to San Jose and grab people's property and actually alter some of the businesses that are along the line in order to make this 4-rail system work. When they passed it, they said it was only going to be 2. And then a couple weeks later, they changed their mind and said, no, we want it 4 rails all the way down. Well, guess what? The VTA in Mountain View is actually part of the, it's in Caltrain's eminent domain, which means that Caltrain would need to seize that area of track from the VTA that's currently in Mountain View in order to go through a 4-track system all the way down to San Jose. So it's just got so many problems on so many different levels. It's just totally unworkable.
But are you saying, well, look, we're just never going to have high-speed rail? It's almost what I'm hearing you say. That would put the U.S. in a very special position vis-a-vis the rest of the developed world?
Well, that might be, but we're not the rest of the developed world. We're not Europe, and I don't want to be Europe. Europe, I mean, look what's going on over there. They've got riots going on in Greece. You've got double-digit unemployment and inflation in Spain. France is going down the tubes. I mean, everywhere you look, they've got all kinds of issues, and they're also not as densely populated as the U.S. They do things differently, and there's just no reason for us to be the same as Europe. So it might be a great idea, but I'm not willing to throw California's budget down the tubes just so that we can say that, hey, we're like the Europeans.
Yeah, I think they're more highly dense than we are actually.
Yeah,
but be that as it may, and I doubt that they're really rioting in the streets because of high-speed rail. But maybe
Well,
I didn't think so. But okay, so let's hear some other voices on this. Yes, John McAllister.
Yeah, we definitely need transportation. There's no doubt about it. As the city grows, people don't want to be sitting in traffic. They need to get around in an efficient manner. Now, the light-speed rail, if it was going through Mountain View, the city's already divided as it is. We got El Camino divides this town. We got Central Expressway divides the town. We got 101. So we're dividing the town. Putting in high-speed rail would divide the town even more, because how are we going to get the high-speed rail through Mountain View over on Castro or Ringstorff? You go under, you go over, and if you do, you're going to take eminent domain, and you're going to divide the city even more. So that's one reason that with the funds that are going to Lightspeed to Caltrans right now for electrification, they're going to do that. We don't have to put in the cross gradings, or we might have to do that. They're going to increase the number of trains that they're going to ride, so that hopefully ridership will join. As you hear that it's going up greatly now. So high-speed rail may be great for the valley, but going through Mountain View, it's not a good idea. But we do have to keep our minds open. We have to look for the innovative ways to transport
Any other
people.
place it could go through? I mean, as a practical matter, if you're going to connect San Francisco with Los Angeles.
But okay, what do you need? We have light rail. I mean the Caltrans. That will be our connection. Caltrans. We have that. We don't need to be going dead end. Why take a high-speed rail and dead end in San Francisco? It needs maybe go from Los Angeles to Portland, somewhere along that, if we're going to do it. I agree that it's very expensive, but we still have to look in future generations to see what's going to happen. Because if we're going down the path now, we're just going to be doing a standstill.
Yes, Margaret.
And I would like to look at the alternate modes of transportation. I think we need to be looking at people that are walking and people that want to ride their bicycles, plus maybe this nice Jetson car that Mike has alluded to. But I think that for Mountain View itself, we want to look at what could we do to set a trend, because I've always believed that Mountain View has had some really good creative ideas. It's already been said that we've got a lot of innovative citizens that live in the city and that care about what we're doing. So I think we need to look at making safer bike and pedestrian paths that we already have. That infrastructure is broken in Mountain View, and I think we need to connect that and think about how is that going to impact the overall ability to have people move around the city. And I believe that by taking just a specific demographic in the area as an example and solve that particular issue, either the senior citizens or the children that are being taken to school every day. If we take a portion of that problem and put a solution to it, then we can solve that specific issue in Mountain View and say, okay, what have we learned from that? Have we done some good things or bad things? How can we make that better and duplicate that around the city for us to solve the Mountain View transportation problem? And then hopefully reach out from that from a regional perspective.
Okay, Margaret brings up transportation. Bicycles, I think that the use of bicycles for commuting in Mountain View just went up again.
It did.
So something like 6% of people get to work via bicycles, and that puts us ahead of Boulder, Colorado, I believe, where people live on their bikes. But housing's expensive there, so maybe that's why they do it. And indeed, as someone who has lived in a country which was very keen on bikes, where you actually had separated bike lanes. They weren't just painted stripes down the road, because that painted stripe down the road doesn't really help you when the truck loses control. Anybody have any new ideas here, or should we be doing something here? It's not expensive, or maybe
we're looking at right now some of the streets like California, like Shoreline, much like we did with Cuesta Boulevard a few years back. Cuesta used to be 4 lanes between Springer and Miramonte. It's now basically 2 lanes with a center turn lane and parking and extra and bike lanes. So we put it on a road diet. You could do that with California. You could do that with parts of Shoreline. However, there are some of the streets that actually do need the capacity to move a lot of cars. We've been talking about Shoreline Boulevard or not Shoreline, El Camino. Could we lose 2 lanes and dedicate those to bus rapid transit? That would make El Camino a real nightmare. I don't think you could really do it on El Camino, but some of our other internal arterials, I think, are possible to do that, and we really could start doing some of the, whether we would actually get to physical separation of the bike lanes or not, I don't know. Possibly with the like the permanent sort of cones, as opposed to like a Jersey barrier, a concrete barrier. But I think we are moving in that direction because this is becoming a more bike-friendly community. We put a lot of money into Stevens Creek Trail, 2 bridges that we just dedicated this year, over 85 and 101, to connect via bike and pedestrian access parts of the community. And so we are moving in that direction, and we need to do more because we have the perfect climate for it.
Anybody want to contest what Mike is saying there?
Well, not contest, but to look at the transportation issue, it has to be much more global than talking about bike lanes or SkyTram. And that is, regardless of whether you make California 3 lanes or 2 lanes or whatever, the predictions are that the traffic is going to increase on that street over the next 20 years. And that what we haven't talked about here is the heavy dependence on auto. And until we have policies that actually in a practical way change that habit people attach to the auto, especially in the North Bay Shore, where some things are going to be addressed in a transportation study coming up, you're not going to really come up with effective policies by looking at transportation in isolation to individual issues like bikes and so forth, because it's much more global than that. The fundamental issue with air quality, with congestion, with resource conservation, using gasoline is auto vehicle travel, motor vehicle travel. And so there are ways of dealing with that in the North Bay Shore itself, and to some degree, and that is with, you can have traffic management programs, you can have connectivity over there, which is going to be needed to get into the part of Mountain View that's actually on federal land.
Are you suggesting having more access points to North Bay Shore? In other words, more bridges that cross 101 that get there?
No, it has to go it has to go across Stevens Creek. Okay, which is kind of controversial right now. Okay. But eventually, there has to be some connectivity to that part of the city, if for nothing else, for public safety.
Got it. Chris, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say that, yes, Mountain View, our existing infrastructure is very auto-centric, and I think what we should be alluding to is that we want to put in place the infrastructure that begins to move us away from that. We can't just wait for automobiles to start to decline, as they already are, we also need to put together comprehensive infrastructure that incents people to stop using cars instead of just stop using them on their own. So I think when you look at that, it's not just about yes, we can look at reconfiguring El Camino in California, and as someone who bikes to work, I can tell you the stripe line also doesn't prevent random doors from opening and causing all kinds of trouble. But it's tempting to look at the major arteries like El Camino in California, and that's not to say that we shouldn't, but it's important to recognize that those are longer term reconfigurations. And what we're trying to do in the planning process is not just force everyone onto those existing auto boulevards, but also building out our trail system so that people aren't forced to just use El Camino. For example, along El Camino Real, we have these super blocks, and we have some developments finally that are coming in, and they've offered to break up those super blocks with bike and pedestrian trails that connect into the existing neighborhood and get you out to services, but you don't have to ride along El Camino the whole way to get, or go all the way around onto a really busy street to get to where you need to go.
Chris, I thought what I was hearing you say there was something about traffic management. I thought maybe since you went to Stanford, they have traffic management. They have
they do.
disincentives for using the car.
Yeah, they do. Sorry. So to switch from bike pedestrians over to auto traffic management, I think the best example of what I think will hopefully come to fruition is North Bay Shore, where you have a lot of companies, really innovative companies that are hopefully going to work together, form a transportation demand management agency. And what you'll see is hopefully a commitment to limit the number of automobiles in and out, the number of trips in and out, similar to what you see at Stanford University today. And what that does is that puts in place the incentive structure to find good ways to get people in and out without increasing the number of trips, whether it's simple things like car sharing and parking permits to newer innovative solutions, whether they're new bike and pedestrian overpasses, pod cars, working together with the city to build a pod car system or something like that. What that does is that puts the correct incentive structure in place, which I think is the most important piece longer term.
Okay, I'm going to give our journalists here a chance to ask some questions here.
They could answer some questions.
Yeah, maybe they could answer some questions, yes. And in fact, I might suggest to you, I know that this is a hopeless suggestion without any chance of going anywhere, but I'll suggest it anyhow. Try and keep your answers fairly compact, simply because we'll get through more of the questions that way. Yeah, you'll get the same amount of airtime, as it were. Just spread over more questions. Claudia.
I want to stay on El Camino and the development there. John McAllister, you mentioned, as part of, and Chris, the EPC, the Environmental Planning Commission, the new housing that's coming up on El Camino, and how much more denser it will be. That would, as part of the Grand Boulevard project, have El Camino facing storefronts that really increase pedestrian traffic. Chick-fil-A is considering having a drive-through in Mountain View, and we're talking about pedestrian, increasing bike use, decreasing automobile use. It had passed originally, I believe, in the EPC. It was and I think sorry,
it didn't come to the EPC.
No, sorry, it was appealed, and now they're going back to City Council. How would, if you were on City Council, I'm not sure if the current council members can discuss this, because I know it's coming before council, but if you were on City Council, how can you speak on one hand of sustainable, decreasing car use in Mountain View, but yet allow drive-throughs, in particular something like the Chick-fil-A proposal? Margaret.
On the City Council, I would definitely honor the appeal not to have the drive-through, because I think that is consistent with the goals of Mountain View. We have committed to be a sustainable city, and that involves being environmentally aware and taking care of that environment and being stewards of the environment. So, number one, we have to consider the noise pollution. We have to consider the people sitting in cars and that impacting the greenhouse reduction. So it is diametrically opposed to the goals of Mountain View. And as a member of the City Council, I would definitely say that does not benefit the community, and so because it doesn't align with our goals.
I'm
Yes,
just
Mike.
going to say the sitting council members can't talk about the Chick-fil-A because they're entitled to due process
The
rights
Bond
when
Act,
this comes up. I will say, however, that right now Mountain View does not have a prohibition against drive-throughs. And this becomes one of the issues that I think it's important to think about is, you know, developers, businesses, people, you know, John McAllister, they want to know what the rules are. And I think one of the things that's difficult is pulling up the ladder before you've really made the rules. And if we're going to say we're not going to allow drive-throughs, then you say that and you don't approve drive-throughs. But if you allow drive-throughs and then you say, well, but we're not going to give you a drive-through, I think that creates a real problem. And it's easy to say we shouldn't have drive-throughs. That's a decision that the council should adopt. And that's the rule. But we don't have that rule yet. So I think that's one of the concerns. And that's actually one of the things that the council asked staff to start looking into is let's study what that means for the city, and is that something that we should do? We have not yet we've given staff that direction, but we haven't dealt with that issue yet.
I think Jim had something to say. Just being devil's advocate, it seems to me the more drive-throughs you have, the less noxious they are because they're shorter lines in each one of them. Less noise, less. That's just me. Jim?
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say, this points out exactly what I was saying in my opening statement about having a city council that's responsive to people and having one that wants to tell everybody what to do. You can't have this, you can't have that. Now, I know that it hasn't come up yet as far as banning the drive-thrus, but I don't think that that issue even should come up because that's not the type of decision the city council should be making in the first place. Basically, the city itself should determine how many drive-thrus are good enough for Mountain View. If El Camino can only support 12 drive-thrus, then people will only go to 12, and when the 13th opens up, it will fail, or one of the others will fail. It comes right back to supply and demand. If you have too much supply of something, the demand drops, and then people don't support it, and it goes away, and you put something else in its place. But you can't just say, we only want this type of business in this particular place, because that Chick-fil-A, whether it's a drive-thru or not, is going to provide jobs to the area, and it's going to provide jobs to low-income people that may not have jobs at this point. I don't know what the unemployment rate is in Mountain View right now, but I can tell you almost 1/3 of my friends are unemployed right now. And so I think that any jobs that we can get within Mountain View are good jobs, whether they're Chick-fil-A or anything else. And as far as the drive-through proposal itself, everybody keeps thinking that the drive-through proposal only applies to restaurants. It doesn't. The proposal that I saw also applies to anything like a Walgreens, which means that if somebody wants to go at midnight to pick up medication for their children, they can't because all of a sudden, there's no drive-through there anymore. And then you're forced to either go to the hospital or in an emergency room or wait until the next day. So it's much bigger than that. And as far as creating more pollution, you're going to get far more pollution from people circling around inside a parking lot looking for a parking space in a very busy restaurant than you are just going through the drive-through, getting your food from the pickup window, and then coming out. And what about the people that are disabled? You want them to get out of their cars and go into the restaurant just to pick up some fast food? I mean, really? These are the kind of things, this is what I'm talking about, unintended consequences. People just don't think through these type of things. And these are the type of things that the council shouldn't be worried about. They should be more worried about, how are we going to protect the city? How are we going to provide good education for our kids? And how are we going to provide housing for people?
Okay, we're coming up close to a break, but did you have any follow-up on this, Claudia?
I think the unemployment rate in Mountain View is about 6.7%.
Very good.
And I think, and I just wanted to add that it's about 60 jobs that the Chick-fil-A would provide. I'm not sure if you guys all received your flyer in the mail. I did here in Mountain View yesterday. It's about 60 jobs that they would provide in Mountain View. The question is whether or not any of those jobs are related to the drive-through. So I'm not sure if anybody else had anything about sustainability. Again, 1,500 new units are being created in El Camino Real. Could those people not walk over to Chick-fil-A? And especially in that corner, Escuela and California, there's a new development going on.
They definitely can walk, but as an owner of a retail store, stores that are the fast foods or have drive-throughs, they generate between 60 and 8% of their business through drive-throughs.
How much is it?
60 to 80% of their business is generated through drive-throughs. So when Mountain View is looking at us as drive-throughs, they have to look at hopefully more the advantages that the business. You have to give the sense of the business. As a business owner, all I hear is, well, you can't do it, but give me a chance to explain the reasons why. Well, one, people vote with their cars. I know it's true, yeah, we're trying to get people out of their cars, but why are so many using them? Why is it so successful? Because they want it. Jim was mentioning the elderly. You have the mother that drives with her small kids. She doesn't want to take them out. Sometimes that mother driving in that car, dropping off, go to a fast food drive-through is a little moment of rest because she can sit there, feed the kids, not have to take them out of the car and do all these things and then get them back in. So
She can't leave them in the car.
Well, she's going to be sitting in the car. The elderly like to go through for the drive-through for their prescriptions. Another issue that brings in the business perspective is at night. People want to take that 2 o'clock run and get a burger or something. They don't open their lobbies because it's a safety issue. They want the drive-through. So when we look at these issues that we're putting constraints on businesses, let's look at all the issues, both sides. The noise issue can be addressed. The sound issue can be addressed. The hours can be addressed. I mean, there are solutions just if you give it a good view to it.
Okay, well, we've got to take a short break here, and then we'll come back and we'll start here with Dan with his questions. I can tell the candidates are just getting warmed up. That might be the studio lights, but we'll be right back with KMVT's in conjunction with the League of Women Voters election coverage for Mountain View City Council. I'm Seth Shostak. We'll be right back. Thank you.
Ooh.
KMVT 15 has been serving the community since the late 70s and became a nonprofit community media center in the early 80s, bringing you local television programming from local volunteers. KMVT Community Media is located right here in the heart of Silicon Valley. We provide hands-on training, equipment, and airtime to our users to build community and empowerment through the expression of media. Our youth camps support hundreds of students yearly and allow their voices to be heard. KMVT has well over 100 volunteers of all ages who come into our studio each and every month to produce local programming. Programming ranges from talk shows on community issues, cooking shows, local artists, magazine news programming, and live entertainment, and much, much more. We cover over 100 sporting events including football, softball, baseball, volleyball, and basketball. We also cover local events like the Art and Wine Festival, Veterans Memorial Day, and the Spring Parade. KMVT provides coverage of local elections, debates, and candidate statements. We offer something for everyone, whether you're a youth, adult, senior, a nonprofit business, or even a for-profit business. So why is KMVT important? Because it's programming like this that brings a community together. We also provide full hands-on training for all ages in studio production and field work, graphics, editing, and an understanding of media in a world surrounded by noise. So we ask the next time you turn on your television or you want to support an important cause, think KMVT 15, your local community television station, bringing the community together through all forms of media. Support community media and television today.
up today.
The woman?
Welcome back to KMVT's coverage of the City Council candidates debate. And we have 6 of the City Council candidates here, all of them actually. 4,
There's more?
4 of whom will be winners. You're all winners, of course, but we're going to flip this table. That would be very dramatic. Finally, something dramatic. I want to also thank our sponsors, because we do have sponsors for tonight's debate. To begin with, the Stewart Rental Company on Old Middlefield here in Mountain View. They have all your party needs, although you will need to invite the right people to the party. But in terms of the physical needs, that's the Stewart Rental Company, Old Middlefield. Also, the Tide House and Brewery, which is right down here in Mountain View, serving a world of extraordinary tastes. And I think by that they mean different kinds of beers, waiting to be explored on draft, including their year-round beers and their rotating seasonals, which sounds like some sort of strange choreographed performance by these beers, as well as a few unique Tide House offerings that you won't find anywhere else. And tasty food. I gotta say, the food at the Tide House is really worth the trip. Anyhow, those are our 2 sponsors. We have our candidates. They are all identified. And we also have our 2 journalists. We have Claudia Cruz here from the Mountain View Patch and Dan DeBolt here from the Mountain View Voice. And Dan, you've perused your list of questions there. You've got something that's going to separate the candidates in some way here, like a threshing machine.
I've got one more question about cars and development. It has to do with parking downtown. And I'd like Mr. Kasperzak to answer first. A new parking structure may be needed to meet parking demands downtown soon. And I'm wondering, should the city continue to subsidize the cost of parking downtown by paying for this garage, or should drivers begin to bear some of this cost as they do in other cities and have paid parking?
Well, I think the real question is again, what can we do systemically to get people out of their cars? I was at a forum the other day, and Daniel, you've heard me say this, but it was just like, if you treated pizza like cars or like parking, parking and it was free, would there ever be enough pizza? And it's just the same with parking. You know, if it's free, it's not free. The taxpayers are paying for it. A parking garage costs about $55,000 a space. That's a lot of money. There are other ways to make parking more efficient with technology, sensors that let people know where parking spaces are open. So you might know on your cell phone where there's available parking. And I don't know if paid parking is the right thing, but I think it is something that we need to look at and explore objectively, so that one, people find that if you had parking, you can reinvest the parking money into the downtown so that downtown can continue to improve. People carpool more if there's paid parking. So there are a lot of benefits, but so far it's sort of been this like, no, we're not even going to talk about it. And where they've started using paid parking, it's been very successful for the businesses and for the community. And it gets people to stop relying so much on their cars.
Yes, John.
Yeah, I like to jump in on a couple of things. Retail needs parking. I know, and Mountain View is one of the more successful towns because it's very vibrant. People can come in. They do have places to park. You hear about other communities that don't have parking. Los Altos, it's dead. Maybe they have other issues. But
You've been downtown at noon?
That sounds like a fairly serious issue.
But Mountain View is very successful, and you need the parking to be in there. And I believe you need to have it free and available, because if not, people are going to start going into the neighborhoods. Mountain View downtown is right in the middle of dense neighbors. And if you start charging people to park in the parking structure, they're going to start going and parking in the neighborhoods. And already right now, the neighborhoods have parking concerns. So I believe that you have a variety of parking, it's accessible, And the more successful you are, the people are going to spend dollars in sales tax. And so the sales tax dollars will take care of our parking structures.
All right. Well, that's a clear difference of opinion. Jim Neal, yeah.
All right, yeah, this is really going to set us apart, as you said. Everybody talks about getting out of their cars. Well, I can pretty safely assume that my wife and I are the only people that didn't come here by car tonight. We came here on public transportation. We came here on the community bus and on the 51. And let me tell you, every time that we go to one of these forums, and I've always gone to a forum on public transportation or walked, I've never taken my car to any one of these forums, so that makes me greener than anybody here. I'm going to tell you, it's a nightmare. It really is a nightmare taking public transportation in Mountain View, because whoever designed the schedule for the VTA, it's like they're playing Frogger. I mean, you go to this bus, to that bus, here and there. You pay every time you get on the bus. It costs, I live less than 5 miles away from the North Shoreline. I had to take 2 buses to get there, and it took over 2 hours to go 5 miles. And round trip is $16 for my wife and I. That is what keeps people in their cars in Mountain View. Not, not that people want to be in their cars, but it's just so expensive, and it takes so much time to get anywhere in a city that's only 12 square miles that it's just, it's insane. So basically, we need to have something that is, a more effective way, and I don't know if we can work with the Valley Transit Authority to, make more efficient bus routes or to make more shuttles. But something needs to be done about the public transportation. And as far as the parking is concerned, I would continue to keep the parking free, and I would look at building down. I would look at building underground parking, so that, and for buildings that come in and they want to build a 4-story building, you add 4 stories of parking below that, and I think that helps alleviate that issue.
Margaret, you wanted to say something.
I think that we want to look at this problem in detail. I think to come up with a realistic solution to parking, you've got to look at what are the factors, and are there particular hours that we could charge for spaces, or what is the supply and demand? Again, we get back to that basic premise of supply and demand. If there is a high demand and not as much supply, we simply don't have it. Then do you have a certain period of time that you would make a charge, and then other times that would not apply. So I think we need to look at this in a lot more detail before we really come to some sound solutions. But I definitely believe that we've got to tackle the parking issue in downtown Mountain View, because it's increasingly worse all the time.
People want more pizza. Dan, what do you think? Happy? Willing to let this issue park?
Say one more thing. I was going to say, we're already looking at having a permit parking area for the downtown residents because of the overflow traffic parking overflow parking from the Caltrain lot, because those people are now parking in the neighborhoods, and so we've been looking at a permit program so that doesn't happen. So then that jives in more easily with other solutions that might come up as well. But again, we need to look at it. We can't just close our eyes to other options.
Yeah, John Inks.
Just to say that, my term on council here, the issues of parking and traffic in general are very, very counterintuitive. And that some downtown merchants that I've seen who actually look at development and look how development is coupled to parking and traffic, and if sometimes it actually appears they will actually understand that a market-based system where there is some kind of paid parking is actually the better way to serve their customers. So I think you have to be open-minded about different solutions. As Margaret suggested, look at the details before you just go off on one policy, or just say no, we can't have paid parking because it'll divert people to the neighborhoods. You have to look at the whole thing in total, and that generally in a lot of our developments downtown, we are actually overparked in some regards right now relative to other cities in the Bay Area.
When you say overparked, you mean we have too many spaces?
The requirements, and so we've looked at modifying the requirements. For instance, the development where the Pearson House is going to be. We changed the requirements there because it made sense, and the in lieu fee that they proposed was extraordinary, but it's the direction that we're going to be going.
Claudia.
One of the things that you'll be tasked as city council members is, balancing the budget every year and negotiating with city employees on their salaries and pensions. Right now, and I had to go back and make sure I had the correct figure, but the city spends 80% of its operating budget on salary and pensions for city employees. That, unless the city's flushed with lots of money in the next couple of years, the economy picks up, could be very unsustainable. How will you address this if things, if you have to maintain this this tight purse strings? How will you look at where to cut, as far as either city services, if you want to maintain the city staff, or how will you continue to negotiate with city employees? I think I saw Margaret's hand go first.
First of all, I think Mountain View has been very, very fortunate with the employees that we have in the city. We have an open budget, if you will. It's transparent to the employees when they come to the table to negotiate. We have just finished signing a 3-year contract with all the employees in the city, and by having them come to the table and be a part of the decision, they come forth with some creative ideas of how they can contribute to reducing the budget and to reducing the longevity of what their health benefits would be, for example. So I think that we need to look at a collaborative approach, particularly with the employees, and I think we would have to be in dire straits to start reducing the quality of services. It's something that we might have to look at, but I think first to look toward the employees, because that's the main part of it, to come to the table with their ideas as well as some ideas from our part to make sure that what we do is we have an equitable win-win agreement between both of us, and it will be for the benefit for not only our citizens but for the employees as well.
Yeah, I'll just say that Mountain View has been very well managed over the last few years. We've, as was mentioned earlier, we're one of the very few cities in California with a AAA bond rating. We have very large reserves, and we've generally very conservatively budgeted and managed the city over the years, and I think we need to keep that going. The 80% number, that's a product of being a city. It's a service organization, and most of your costs are going to come from the city providing the services that are necessary, and most of those are through service employees and the programs that we provide, etc. So it's important to remember the city, first and foremost, is a service organization. It's there to provide you with the services that you need. Over the last few years, we've made a lot of cuts. We're down to, from a staffing perspective, we're about as lean as we can get. Especially at City Hall, we're having to hire consultants for various things. We're having to do a lot of things that are very indicative of a very lean staff. So I don't think there's too much we can cut on the staff side. But we've been very fortunate, and I think in years what's important for us in terms of cutting those employee costs is to maintain collaborative relationships with those. We're very lucky in that, unlike some neighboring cities, we aren't constantly butting heads with our employee groups. They've been very proactive, worked with us when we need to make cuts, and in some cases they've even offered more than we've asked. And I think what's key to continuing that is continuing that collaborative relationship with them so that we can continue any cost cutting that we need to do going forward. And the other place that I would hesitate it can be tempting to raise fees for business permits and things where folks come in, but what we don't want to do is hinder the economic activity. I think in future years that will actually help us build up and recover from the slump that we've been in. and we'll have hopefully economic activity will help make up for some of the losses that we've had.
Okay, so it's a balancing act between
It is.
increasing income and reducing costs. But this 80% number, I thought I saw 84%, something like that. What should it be? I mean, many of you are well versed in this. What should the city's, what fraction of its operating budget should be going to, salaries and so forth? Anybody know?
Yeah.
Yes, Jim.
I'd say no more than 40 or 50%. And the reason I say that is because if you look in the private sector, there's no private sector producer that pays more than 50% in benefits. As a matter of fact, I started talking about this issue long before the cities in California started going bankrupt. I actually talked about this in front of City Council, and I talked about it extensively. And I just want to say that, McDonald's is a service organization, and they don't spend 80% on benefits for their employees. I mean,
Jim, they sell a product, though. They sell a product. We don't sell a product.
Right, and that's also part of the point. Because you don't sell a product, you can't generate revenue to keep paying these extravagant benefits over a long period of time. Now, I wouldn't cut the benefits for people that are already working for the city. Whatever agreement is already in place, I think you have to honor that. You can't just go breaking a contract because economic circumstances have changed. However, what I would do is I would make changes for anybody new that is coming into work for the city government. And basically, you have to start shifting more of the responsibility for providing for retirement to the employee. They can no longer pay only 17% and get an 8-to-1 return on investment. I ran the numbers, and a person that makes $100,000 in the city over 30 years will pay in $330,000 into their retirement. If they live another 30 years, they'll get out $2.4 million. That is not sustainable by any kind of mathematics. I don't care what kind of CPA you are. You can't run the numbers and expect that if someone pays in $330,000 and gets out $2.4 million, that you're going to be able to continue that over a long period of time. So you've got to readjust that and have the employees pick up more of their health care, pick up more of their retirement, make it more like a 401k. 401ks aren't doing great right now, but at least that money will be there. The people that are in Stockton, where the city's gone bankrupt, they may not get their retirement. They'll have worked 30 years, and for what? If the city goes broke and decides that they don't have the money, they get nothing. At least for the 401k, you've got something.
I'll just jump in and say we're nowhere near in danger of what happened to Stockton. I think if we got anywhere near there, our employee groups would be letting us know that we were in danger there. We've been very well managed, and we will continue to conservatively manage the city. And we can throw out percentage cuts that we should make, but the fact of the matter is we don't live in a vacuum. If we lived in a vacuum, then sure, we can cut things down to 40%, and people will go crazy, but we could do it. We don't live in a vacuum. If we were to cut from 80% down to even 60 or 50, no one would want to work for the city of Mountain View. They would all go to Palo Alto. They would all work elsewhere. It's just like if I, at my small business where I work, were to cut salaries dramatically and say, look, folks, we can't afford these. We can't afford to pay you a competitive wage. No one's going to work for you.
I wasn't talking about cutting salaries.
Exist.
I was talking about cutting the amount that the city puts into the benefits. And if you do that with the new employees, I mean, I don't even get an employer match. I pay 100% of my retirement. The city pays, the city and the state and whoever else puts into the retirement for city employees puts in the other 83%, while the employees are only putting in 17. So I'm not talking about cutting anybody's benefits. I'm not talking about cutting anybody's salaries. As a matter of, and I didn't say that the city was in trouble, because it's not. This is what I'm talking about long term, to make sure it doesn't get into trouble, because these cities for a long time weren't in trouble, and then one day they woke up and found out, guess what? The money's not there anymore. And that's what I'm saying. Over the long term, you've got to do something, because it will become a problem.
Or the CPA to
Yes.
weigh,
Well,
right?
okay, yeah, I'm a CPA and a businessman, and so when you were talking about the 80% or how you deal with the project, I think Mountain View isn't going in the right direction. In that the whole state of California, their train of thought about employees and employee benefits is changing. So we're doing the first steps to reevaluate, and both sides are starting to realize they can't go the way they used to. Another thing that Mountain View is doing that's very good is that we're taking our North Bay Shore or our industrial areas and making them ability for those companies and new companies to come to expand. So we're going to be increasing our property values. We're going to be increasing the economic stimulus. Mountain View has its own stimulus package sort of going along because of the redevelopment through the general plan. So we're going to be enjoying benefits of the new general plan, the benefits of the new economy, or the growth in Mountain View from those projects. So when you're saying, do we need to cut? Yes, no, I mean, no, we don't need to really cut, because we have to take a long-term forecast. And the city does that. They had a 10-year forecast that they did, and possibly 5. So in my business, I forecast out too. And instead of taking the shorter period of the 3-year for when you're dealing with employee contracts, we need to look at maybe a 5 and a 10-year, so that both sides of the labor and management will have a better feel for what we're doing over the long term, and so that we don't need to make those cuts, that there's small adjustments as we go along.
All right. I think one of the other things is, yes, I mean, the state and cities around the state are looking at ways to reform pension. Mountain View has been very aggressive in that. Our employees have always paid their share, and they pay part of the city's share, which is unheard of until recently around the state. But, you know, the city of Mountain View doesn't exist so that we have jobs for public employees. The city exists to provide services to the people that live and work in Mountain View. And we need to keep that in mind. And we need to look at, are there ways that we can provide those services as efficiently as possible? And as technology changes, are there ways that things will change? For example, recently the building codes changed. All new houses are going to have sprinkler systems built in. Do you really need to have your fire services able to respond in 3 minutes or less? It costs a lot to have that standby ability. I'm not making a value judgment that that's right or not, but again, we need to be willing and able to talk about things like that. We have changed the operating model at the golf course this past year. Do we really need city employees making a city pension being greenskeepers? I don't know if we need city employees running a senior center where in Palo Alto the senior center is run by a nonprofit. So there may be other ways that we can do things that keep a check on the cost of government and still provide the high quality services, because the people of Mountain View expect the services that they get, and they expect them to be good. And we've got to figure out how to do that within the constrained revenue and income models that we have.
All right, I'm going to give this back to Dan. Dan, you're next up.
Okay, I guess I'm going to change the subject and ask about at what point should the city revisit the possibility of allowing medical marijuana dispensaries in Mountain View?
Medical marijuana dispensaries in Mountain View.
I think the most appropriate time, we reviewed this on the Environmental Planning Commission a year or two ago, and the City Council reviewed it, and then some legal wranglings kind of put it on hold. I think the appropriate time to review it will be once the legal landscape settles a little bit more, and we know that we're not out there. There's a lot of areas in which we want Mountain View to be a leader at the forefront, but I think carving out
isn't one of them.
carving out new it's less about marijuana and carving out this very navigating this very tricky legal landscape. It could end up costing us a lot of money, and if we're the ones kind of seeking that path. So I think the best thing for us to do is really to wait for the legal landscape to settle both in the state.
Any time estimate on when you see this happening? Is this going to happen in the next year or two?
I knew this about a year or so ago because there was Santa Clara County was making their decision about a year ago. I hope that we're able to revisit it in the next year or two. I'm not trying to cop out and say, maybe that's 5 or 10 years and we just won't have to deal with it while I'm on council. I'm more than happy to deal with it. I mean, I voted for I voted to allow medical marijuana dispensaries at a few key very strategically chosen sites while I was on the Environmental Planning Commission. So it's not something that I'm trying to shy away from, and that I would shy away from on council. I'm very cautious about costing the people of the city of Mountain View a heck of a lot of money just to be at the forefront of this thing. I think it's important to wait for the landscape to settle.
Let's hear some other opinions. John?
Well, you can say that I'm waiting for the legal landscape to settle. It is not going to settle, okay? Because you have basically the California government attacking private property, and then you have the federal government basically overruling California law. The Cities Association last year recommended that we have the federal government, the state government, give us consistent regulations. Consistent in what sense? You know, so the idea that you're going to get clarity from the state government and the federal government is not clear to me at all. And that's no argument per se for handling it at the local level, but if you want to take on a bold policy change, it's basically the people that are interested in this community. And right now we're kind of split. And you know, we don't have a council majority that completely supports considering medical marijuana. I'm not an advocate for smoking marijuana at all, but I'm tolerant enough to understand that there are people in need to use it for medical reasons and so forth, and that if it comes back again, I would consider supporting it, but I'm not expecting clarity from state and federal government.
All right, there's still a lot of smoke clouding this issue. I'm going to move on to Claudia, just so we get through some more questions here.
Okay.
The Shoreline Community District funds. So I understand there's obligations that need to be taken care of on the other side of 101 North Bayshore due to the landfill and state law. But if there were an opportunity to use more of that money for things within the city, what kind of things would you use that money for?
I've supported the existing temporary measure cost sharing with the Shoreline District funds with their local schools. I think that made a lot of sense. I think we'll decide very soon whether or not what that sharing could be in the long run. As was mentioned earlier, the first and foremost purpose of those funds is to ensure that the Shoreline District, which is a big economic powerhouse for Mountain View, continues to create jobs and bring economic growth to the city. So I think having just passed the general plan, there will be some development out there, and we've talked about the transit problems that are going to have to be addressed. So I think those should be the first priorities for those funds, but I also feel that we will be able, I think out of fairness, I think there can also be a longer term cost sharing arrangement between the city and the schools in order to ensure that we not only have a great bed of economic activity and we're attracting the best and brightest in the working world, but we're also able to provide high quality educations in Mountain View. And I think it's only fair that we do share some of those funds as long as we meet our obligations out there.
Yes, Jim?
Yeah, I disagree. I don't think that the funds should be used for other things, at least not without a vote from the people of Mountain View. And also, there's an issue where a number of the systems that are used for taking care of the, for lack of a better term, of the garbage that needs to be, or the waste sites in that area, there's nothing to replace them if there's a major earthquake. Basically, if there were to be a large seismic event in the area that damages the systems that contain the waste, there isn't any money set aside in the fund to take care of those things. And even though the fund has a $10 million reserve, I don't even know if that would be enough to replace all of those type of systems. And I don't know why that wasn't planned out or why that wasn't given priority. But considering that we're in an area that's very prone to earthquakes, and considering that the fund is supposed to take care of that particular type of issue, that would be where I would put the priority for the funds. Also, there's the possibility that the asset or the property values could go down at some point. If the property values go down and continue to go down even further, that means that there are less funds available in the Shoreline Fund. That means that the funds that we're giving to the schools may decline anyway. So basically, you've got all these issues that the Shoreline Fund was specifically set up for, that it is basically barely able to cover now. And if you keep adding more and more demands on it, at some point you're going to be overdrawn, and then the funds are going to have to come out of the city's general operating fund.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving this along if I can. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to jump in at Stan's turn here, but I'm going to jump in with something. I just want you to give me essentially a one-sentence answer, just to establish where your real priorities are for the city. I mean, suppose somebody comes in, George Beresford Tipton, if anybody remembers who that was, comes in with a $10 million check and hands it to the city of Mountain View. It's just 10 extra million bucks. What would you spend it on? What would you do with that $10 million? So we just go very quickly. Chris?
I think I would probably use it to fill any gaps that we have in the next year or two. I would hold on to it for the next year or two.
You use it as a
unless you
backstop,
force me to spend
Margaret?
it.
I would look for ways to not only to put it into a reserve, but also to invest it so we could get a return on our money.
It's all bankers. Jim?
Yeah, I have to say I would put it in a reserve also. I think it was a good idea with the $30 million that Google gave to the city, and I think that another $10 million check, you can't have too much of a reserve.
You know, we don't make anything on investments. It's just preservation of capital. But what I would do is I would use it as a down payment on acquiring a piece of property in the Wisman area for another community park. It's I ran on that 4 years ago. It's an area that needs major parkland, and that would be a sizable down payment on a piece of property.
All right, they'd park the money, you'd turn the money
Put
into
it
a
into
park.
a park.
Right. John?
Yeah, I agree. Parks, land. You know, you're putting in. Put it in for investment. You get less than a 1%. With inflation going, you take that 10 million. You got to spend it now. It's going to dwindle over time. So parkland, open space.
John?
You get a different answer. You get a $10 million windfall. What you do is you put it, we're already balanced, keep it in your reserves, refund it to the taxpayers.
Okay. Dan?
I guess I want to ask a question about park space, and
We almost got some more park space for you.
Yeah, bank account
Yeah.
park space or a real park space?
there was an issue with the development recently that was approved by the council that there was some complaints among council members that there wasn't enough park space in the project, and it was an isolated project. It was Evelyn and Moore Park, and I'm wondering what council members think should be done to make sure that there is park space in projects like that, and in areas where there isn't, where there's an isolated neighborhood without park space. What can be done to fix that?
Margaret?
I think the discussion, Daniel, was the possibility of asking the developers to consider park space within their development instead of just putting the park and lieu money into a fund to let us find where else we could put in a park. So I think it came up as an idea, and the proposal certainly was not something that they felt that the developer at that time would embrace, because the project had not included that. But I think it was an idea that was spawned off of the whole thought that there are projects and developments where we would like to incorporate a park, and what is the accessibility to that park by the public. And so there are a number of considerations that I think we would have to take into, and really have that as an open discussion with a developer to see where they're developing, what are the opportunities for a public park and public access for us to have more parks in the city.
Yes, Mike?
Well, I think what Margaret was alluding to and what Councilmember Siegel was talking about is what we do with our park funds now is we have to go out and find a piece of land that probably has a house on it, buy it, and tear down the house, because there's no more free space. But if a developer is coming in and has a blank slate and they want to build 100 houses, what if they only built 98 and they used part of their park in lieu fee, which is something that they have to pay to the city anyways? They use that, they get a credit for it, and then we use some of the fees we've collected and buy some of that land from them and create a public park within their thing. It would be larger than they would be required to do, but we have some resources. They have undeveloped land at the time, so we're not putting a house on it and then having to tear the house down. And so I think it was a fairly creative idea, but it's the sort of thing that the council needs to adopt that as a policy, so that developers coming in know that as they're planning out their project, that's an option, and building their pro formas around that, as opposed to, oh, by the way, we're just going to get rid of 2 of your houses.
Anybody else feel that?
You know, I think they should expand it, depending on the project. Not necessarily a public park, but the open space within the development. Some projects they can put in a public park, but just the overall development, that they put in the amenities and the open space within the park, and still we get our park fees, but the project itself doesn't have to be as dense and a little more open or planned a little better, so that the residents in that particular development can stay on property and enjoy that without having to go driving around. So it's a combination of both, in lieu fees to get the public parks, but also the development itself is self-contained with its own park.
Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Claudia for her next question.
As a Mountain View resident, you'll be able to cast a vote on Measure M, which is the measure that would cap executive salary pay at El Camino Hospital. I'm wondering, I know as council members, it's your honorarium, I could call it that. It's very small. It's very, it's an honorarium, but you work 30 to 40 hours a week reading materials, attending events, sitting on committees. And the city, just like, I guess, a hospital executive and city residents, I guess, hope to find the best council members to represent them. However, the measure did go on the ballot. And last week, the city of Sunnyvale, which also sends residents over to Camino, voted as a council not to endorse Measure M, not to tell people to vote no on Measure M. How would you vote? Do you believe that executive pay at El Camino Hospital should be kept?
Just to be clear, Sunnyvale took a position opposed to Measure M.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Okay, Jim? Yeah.
Yeah, I would oppose it as well. Again, this is something where you can't tell people how much money they can make or how much someone is worth. Someone is worth whatever the market will bear, and it's supply and demand. If it takes a very special skill set to do that specific job, and you have to pay somebody a lot of money to do it right, then it's much better to pay somebody to do it right than to put a cap on it and get the best person that's willing to work for that salary and then find out later that they screwed everything up. I mean, would you want to go to a doctor that had a salary cap of, say, $500? What kind of doctor do you think you're going to get for that kind of money? I just don't think that'll work.
Yeah, Margaret?
I think that you also have to think about the impact of this type of a vote on the administration of any type of organization, because as Jim alluded to, you get what you pay for, and if the market is demanding that your qualifications and the requirements that you have to manage such a large hospital, if then it is such a small salary, that is going to degrade the services and the ability for that organization to provide what they provide for us today. So I would vote no on M.
The CEO makes over $1 million a year.
Well, there is another approach, which is coming up right now, is the elected board officers. We have the opportunity to elect, and that's one way to bring transparency into El Camino Hospital. They've had some problems with their transparency about how much people were making. We elect the representatives that will do their job, be transparent, and be open with you. And that way, then you won't have that worry about having to vote, this money or that. So I say go to the ballot box and vote for the elected officials. That will help keep that transparency going.
Maybe just to short circuit this, is there anybody who would cap the salary?
No, I think this is a really classic example of ballot measure budgeting. And if you're not happy with the salary of the CEO, then you deal with that by voting for or against the directors of the district who hired and set the salary. But it's a really slippery slope, and if it's too much, then you deal with the people that hired her, but not with capping the salary, because then you're hamstringing the whole organization.
Right. Let's go to your next question, Dan.
So recently there was quite a bit of controversy about a beer garden that wanted to open downtown.
Near Tide House, I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
Stein's Beer Garden. It will. I think it will open, right? It was approved.
Yes, the council.
Yeah. And so I'm curious to know, if candidates support that sort of business, or if you're really concerned about how that sort of business affects residential neighbors, even if it's just a handful.
Yeah.
Well, okay, since he said not, I would have voted to support it also. I mean, the business, there's been that business there for how many years? 20 years. You build a new apartment, new complex, residential complex. What were these people thinking, that it wasn't going to be productive? We have an asset in Mountain View. You have a landowner who has an asset. He wants to get his economic return on it. He's willing to work with the neighbors and collaborate. He's willing to work with the city. Yes, let's support it.
I would have supported it as well. I actually thought the limit on the hours that they were going to impose were probably too strict. I really think that those businesses like that thrive in downtown Mountain View, and that's what creates the atmosphere that has made downtown Mountain View so successful over the years. And I know it's not so great for the residents, but when you buy into a piece of property that close to Castro Street in downtown, you just have to understand that what is there today probably isn't going to exist there tomorrow, and that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take some limiting steps to make sure that it isn't just a free-for-all. But it does mean that buying property there comes with certain expectations, and I think having a beer garden with a real garden outside that's open till 10 p.m. or whatever it happens to be isn't an unreasonable expectation.
Yeah, I think people complaining about that is like moving into Manhattan and complaining about the taxis. I mean, you know what you're going to get when you move there, so you might as well not complain. And actually, I only live about 2 blocks from that, and I don't mind being there. And I actually plan to patronize them once they're open.
Okay, well, to avoid this becoming an infomercial, is somebody actually against this? I mean, all right, we can move on.
We both support it.
Steins is not open, and there's a reason for that now, because they got past the hour limit, but now they're having a problem with the city staff and the fence. They want them to move the fence in, and that's going to crowd their beer garden, and it's changing their whole pro forma on the property. So it's unfortunate that this thing is not over yet. I mean, there's more work to do to get Steins open. I've worked with Ted Kim and tried and listened to what he's told me with these problems and talked to city staff.
Okay, but that's a somewhat different issue than what Dan was asking about, right? I mean, it isn't that they're objecting on the basis of this being a beer garden near a residential.
Yeah.
And that now it's just a run-of-the-mill planning thing.
Run-of-the-mill, right.
Okay.
I didn't identify some of the questions that I had asked from the public, some more that I came up with, some that people sent me. But this is one that's definitely from the public, and it's regarding leaf blowers. Would you, as a city council member, consider banning leaf blowers?
I guess I'll jump into this. I think banning leaf blowers is probably, I think what they're probably getting at is looking at gas-powered leaf blowers.
Both gas and the noise. I think if you change it,
Yeah.
You may be able to reduce the noise, but some leaf blowers start working at 7 a.m., 9 a.m. in the morning, and people might still be, people have different hours in Mountain
Right.
View. So I think part of it is the environmental effect, part of it is the noise.
And I think some of our neighboring cities might have different regulations than we have on these. I'm certainly open to looking at these things. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's, I'm not going to blow it off and say that it isn't
Nice one.
but I'm sure I'm happy to look at these things as new technologies come along. But leaf blower technology, I'm sure, has come a long way since they were. I mean, if we can move beyond gas-powered leaf blowers, then great. I mean, the key is to time it right and to make sure that you aren't really causing more harm than you're actually getting benefit out of. So I'm happy to review those as time goes on, as technology changes and the community's needs change.
Well, this is an issue, of course, that it isn't peculiar to Mountain View
No,
or
it
even to
isn't
the
at
Silicon Valley. Every place in the country has this issue.
Yeah.
So presumably you do look at what other communities, comparable communities.
And
do.
Los Altos has the ban on leaf blowers. And yet you drive along and you see their gardeners with extension cords going, 100 yards because they have big lots and they're using them out there. So is it an issue of the noise or the pollution?
Yeah.
If it's the noise problem, Honda makes these great little generators that I have that are very quiet. So, I mean, as technology does go, they can always put a silencer on it. So,
I think they ought to genetically engineer the trees. That's my solution.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to another question from Dan.
As NASA moves to dump responsibility of the Moffett Airfield and Hangar 1 to possibly to another government agency, what possible new uses should the city support and what uses should it oppose for this property?
I'll start off with that because it's way more complicated than you do that, because what the government does is access it to see if there's other federal agencies that want to take over the airfield. You know, the community of Mountain View and Sunnyvale have been very clear over the years: no commercial aviation, no air cargo, no general, private airplanes. People want it, I think, to maintain as an airfield because it's a huge federal asset with limited federal use. That's the position of the city now, and I support that. I think when people ask, well, should we put housing out there, or what could we do? Moffett Field, in my opinion, is not going to be plowed under and become free land that they give to the city as like a new community. You know, the historic Air Force Navy base isn't going away. That's still part of NASA. We're just talking about the runways and the hangars. I think it will probably stay as an airfield, but we really need to work to keep it from becoming commercial aviation and really keep it more restricted for federal uses. It's a great point for disaster preparedness and relief. We've got the Air National Guard out there. NASA's not going anywhere. So that's, I mean, it's appropriate for what it is. And my concern is that it gets handed over to the Department of Transportation, and they want to open it up as a reliever airport for San Jose, and that would be terrible. And we're working really hard to prevent that.
Well, it could also, going on with what Mike was saying, that technology could be changing. So you have an airfield that could be an experiment. They're taking people to the to the space center. Who knows what the development can take out there, and we could use the airfield for that. So
We make it a spaceport out of it.
not a launch site, no. But I'm not saying a launch site.
You can't launch from this latitude.
No.
That's going to be a good hit.
No. But I'm just saying, as development goes, who knows? You know, they're using jets to go out there and experiment with that.
Well,
The
Mike
Homeland
just
Security.
said NASA isn't going anywhere. They just landed on Mars.
Yeah.
Other ideas about the NASA federal airfield?
Yeah, actually, the land was originally taken from parts of Mountain View and Sunnyvale, and to be honest, I'd like them to give it back. I mean, basically, they've had that land, they've been able to use it, and now it's another hazardous waste site, more or less. So I think that they should turn it back over to the city, and then allow us to redevelop that land to the best use for the city of Mountain View. And then Sunnyvale could take their part and redevelop it for their best use.
Where are we
I don't
going to
know
get
why
the
they
money
should keep it.
to take care of the environmental problem?
The same way that we did with the same thing that happened with the North Shoreline area, right? That was basically that was all San Francisco's garbage, right? And you just you take part of the turn it into a redevelopment zone, and you basically use that money to.
But where would you get the upfront money to clean it up
Polluters are
before you could
responsible for
redevelop it?
that. The polluters are responsible.
And
Well, we
well,
sold
but
it
it's
to
the federal
them. We
government.
didn't give
Yeah.
it to them. They didn't take it from us. We sold it to them
Okay,
for
well,
$1. But
Yeah.
Well, then my information on that was wrong. But still, it was originally part of Mountain View, and I think that we should try to find a way to utilize. I mean, after all, everybody's saying that Mountain View is landlocked and we only have so much space in which to do things. And so, you were talking about purchasing more land before. Well, here's another opportunity.
Okay, that's at least a different point of view. Anybody else on this? Okay.
Oh, look, John
John
had
had a
his hand up.
question.
Oh,
Well,
I'm sorry,
I
John.
mean, the only comment is that I think that the federal budget is basically busted. I mean, they don't have enough money for it. So you're going to see more privatization, research and development, more Carnegie University, and
More friends,
and,
yeah, to make friends.
and the aviation component will continue at some level.
But no space, no launching. Just want to make sure. No launching.
You
More
want to talk
radiation.
about noise pollution?
Maybe the iPods will become.
All right, we're down to the last 5 minutes here. So, Claudia, make this your most incisive question.
Well, can you disclose any conflicts of interest you might have as a result of being elected or re-elected to the city council that might cause you to recuse yourself from any future proceeding? I mean, I know, Mayor Kaspersak, you've, I believe, owned Google shares, so every once in a while you recuse yourself, or all the time you recuse yourself from any proceedings on Google. Is there anything else that you can disclose now so that viewers, readers, the electorate knows ahead of time what they might be in for?
Yeah, Jim.
I'm proud to say that I don't have any money from any special interests, and I'm also proud to say that I'm not endorsed by any special interests. Therefore, I don't have any conflicts whatsoever. The only conflict that I would have is if one of you were to come in that voted for me and maybe had something that came before the council that affected you directly. But no, other than that, I have absolutely no conflicts of interest whatsoever, and I'm proud that it's that way.
John Hanks.
I happen to have a very vanilla Form 700 that we fill out. It's the financial disclosure. I own all mutual funds, no individual stocks. The only conflict that I have is where my property is up on Showers Drive there. It's close to the San Antonio Precise Plan, and I have to recuse myself from anything associated with changing the San Antonio plan.
Nobody has property along the high-speed
Well,
railway.
I was talking about vanilla. If another ice cream shop came along, I might concern myself, but yeah, I would excuse it if they Ben and Jerry showed up or something like that. But yeah,
We all have to recuse ourselves of anything having to do that's within 500 feet of where we live. I mean, that's standard law.
But what
I don't
about
think at the
any
moment I have
individual stocks or?
I live at, well, obviously I live in Mountain View. I also work for a company that's here as well, and I have stock in them. So even though they don't own property in Mountain View, obviously if something were, I'm not sure what the threshold is for that, because it varies based on amount. So we'd have,
Right.
but I think yeah. So aside from my occupation, I mean, I own a condo near, I think the only site that I would probably have to recuse myself is that empty lot where BMW parks their, it's their overflow parking lot. If that ever gets developed and I'm still where I'm at, then I'll probably have to recuse myself from that. But I did, several years ago, I owned some Google stock, but I divested of all that once I was appointed to the Planning Commission because I didn't want that to cause any trouble. So
that was
Too bad Facebook isn't in Mountain View. So you had
Why
any
do you own
Facebook
Facebook
stock?
stock? Of course not.
Anybody else want to weigh in on this? Okay. Any last quick question, Dan, that they can answer in about one word each?
Do you see the Day Worker Center as a valuable asset worth supporting if the permit is challenged? In the
Daycare
future?
center, is it?
Day Worker
Day
Center.
worker.
Day worker center, sorry. If it's challenged, would you
What's
support?
being challenged?
If it is, would you support the Day Worker Center if it was challenged for some reason?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I supported it, and I'm a huge supporter of it. I'm not certain what you mean by support it, but there may be issues with the city providing actual financial support to it. But in terms of what it's done, getting where it is, I've been fully supportive, and it's a great asset for the community.
Absolutely.
No. No pushback on that, Dan. Well, we're down here to the last 30 seconds, so I'm just going to thank you all for coming here, our candidates, our 6 candidates. I hope the viewers have looked you over, listened to what you had to say, made a judicious evaluation, because 4 of you are going to the city council and 2 of you are going to plan your next attempt to get elected. I also want to thank our producer, Shelley Wolf, and the director, Bobby Chastain, and our graphics guy, Mark Taylor. This has been brought to you via KMVT and the League of Women Voters, and I want to wish you all a very pleasant evening, and thank you for watching. My name is Seth Shostak. Good night to you all.